This is always the hardest part of the night, is to open the night, given everybody taking seats. First of all, thank you all very much, everybody here, for coming out this evening. My name is Derek Mitchell. I am the president of NDI. It is my pleasure and privilege to open NDI's 2019 Gala Dinner. Tonight's dinner, thank you. Tonight's dinner is somewhat unique in the history of these dinners. And it is not just because it is the first dinner in more than 80 years in which there is a Washington Baseball World Series being played. Go Nats! And just to let you know, we will be confiscating phones so we keep your undivided attention. And maybe it suggested that we announce scores, but we'll see. This year, in addition to honoring the activists, politicians, and average citizens who are on the front lines of democratic change around the world, we will look specifically at the connection between culture, speech, and democracy. And we will do so through the unique prism of humor. But before I make a few opening comments on the evening's theme and then turn things over to our featured guests, please allow me to take a moment to acknowledge several of you out there who are so very important to NDI and our work. First, and I'm not sure how much he knows about NDI, but I want to note that we have legendary musician Herbie Hancock in the house. Herbie, right there. Herbie Hancock needs no introduction, but suffice to say he represents the rare kind of artist who transcends genres and limitations to tell universal stories through music. Mr. Hancock, thank you for joining us this evening. And now that you've been introduced to us, we'll have to get you on an NDI program sometime. Also, jazz artists of a kind are my predecessors, Brian Atwood and Ken Wallach, two individuals who made this institute what it is today. Thank you both for being here tonight and for the support you continue to provide me. Please wave or stand up where you are, Ken and Brian, where you are. Yeah, okay, thank you. NDI literally would not exist without the strong commitment of Congress for the work that we do. We are honored to have several distinguished members of Congress here this evening. Senator Tina Smith, Maxine Waters, Jim Himes, Bonnie Watson-Coleman. We have 7 new members, all great additions. Tom Malinowski, good friend, Alyssa Slotkin, Jason Crow, Andy Kim, Chrissy Houlihan, Mikey Sherrill, and Representative Michael San Nicolas. Thank you all. Let's give them all a big round of applause. And huge thanks. We are, as always, extraordinarily grateful for the support and partnership provided by our parent organization, the National Endowment for Democracy, as well as our friends and partners from the U.S. Agency for International Development and the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Thank you all. U.S. support, thank you, has also benefited over the past 2 decades by NDI partnerships with other democratic nations also engaged in supporting democracy work around the world, including the Canadians, the British, the Dutch, Danes, Swiss, Swedes, and Norwegians. Thank you all. The international solidarity and support you provide is invaluable during these challenging times. I also want to thank the many corporate and private donors who have made this evening possible and are listed in the program. We are most grateful. Thank you. And I want to recognize NDI's close friends from the labor union family who have been partners in support. There we go. They've been so supportive of NDI's work over the years and are supporting this event tonight. Thank you so, so much. I want to acknowledge some of our DC-based partner organizations, including our sister organization, the International Republican Institute and the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES, our SEPS consortium partners. I should add that in these days of extreme partisanship and polarization in the United States and around the world, showing a bipartisan face in the work that we do can be quite powerful and unique, but critically important. The Solidarity Center and the Center for Private Enterprise are NED's sister organizations with whom we work closely on many initiatives, both here in Washington and around the world. Thank you for the partnership. And the NDI board. We have one of the most remarkable and committed board of directors in town, headed by our chairman, the incomparable Madeleine Albright, whom we will hear from later tonight. And our executive committee, Tom Daschle, Hadi Babbitt, Mark Nathanson, Rob Libertor, and Tamara Wittis. Thank you all. I can't list everyone on my distinguished board, but as a group, let me thank you for all your guidance and support and ask all former and current board members here tonight to stand and be recognized. Please, everybody. Finally, let me just say about NDI's incomparable staff. Obviously, not everyone from NDI can be here in this room tonight. We have over 1,000 staff members spread over 50-plus offices worldwide. But forgive me if I say a deep collective thanks to all of them. Representing dozens of nationalities and cultures, we come together for a single purpose: to promote and share the promise of democracy and ensure that promise remains alive for everyone, equally everywhere. There's a lot of work to do, no secret there, and we have to stay on our toes to address the many headwinds to democracy that we face nowadays from many corners. But there is no other group I'd rather go to battle with, as it were. I am proud to be associated with all of you, and I thank you for what you do. Now, even my board doesn't know this, but this evening has been a long time coming for me. When I was in high school, I used to sneak into comedy clubs every Thursday night in New Haven, Connecticut, to watch stand-up comedians who had driven down from Boston. Stephen Wright, some of you may know, Kevin Nealon before Saturday Night Live. During my otherwise regimented high school existence, it was a respite of irreverence, served up with a 2-drink minimum. And no doubt I should have left it there when it came to comedy. Look, but don't touch, leave it to the pros. Nope. Soon, a buddy and I had an idea. Hey, what if we produced a parody of our school newspaper? And what if on graduation day we handed it out to teachers and students as if it were the actual paper? What could possibly go wrong? Well, we did it, and here's what went wrong. We were told after we graduated not to come back to the school ever again. And here's the kicker: I haven't been back. A few years later, they tore the building down. Coincidence? Probably. But as a comedian say, true story. Now later, in 1989 to be exact, when I lived in Taiwan, I worked for the leading English language newspaper there at the time. There may be some Techro folks here, the China Post. Taiwan then was in the very early stages of its democratic transition. One of its legislators, in fact, was nicknamed Rambo for his tendency to assault fellow parliamentarians on the floor of the legislature. The media were also slowly liberalizing. The publisher of the China Post one day asked my advice whether she should publish a U.S. syndicated humorist named Art Buchwald. I'm sure those of you of a certain age will remember Art Buchwald. I do. I thought a moment. I said yes. I said, perhaps rather self-seriously, that I thought what Taiwan needed most during its democratic transition was a sense of humor, some proportion, some irreverence to reverse what I considered the old mindset where everything was an aggressive, high-stakes, winner-take-all battle, and allow for a new, more open, more democratic attitude to take hold. Buchwald got into the paper. Now, it's debatable at best whether Art Buchwald made any difference in Taiwan. And these small personal anecdotes do not remotely compare to the dangerous struggles humorists of all kinds deal with every day around the world. We will hear from several of those exceptionally brave voices tonight. But I tell those stories to convey that I have long felt a connection between humor and democracy. At the core of humor and laughter is a freedom of spirit, certainly of speech, an irreverence and assertion of individualism that are essential to a democratic culture. While a joke may sometimes just be a joke, to be truly funny, there has to be some truth behind it. And truth can be dangerous to some, to autocrats in particular. To an autocrat, humor and laughter are a direct, almost subversive challenge, as they strike at the heart of his, and it's usually a his, power to intimidate and ultimately control through fear. Sometimes there's nothing more dangerous than irreverence, which is why I consider humor arguably the most democratic form of speech. All that said, the worst thing one can do is to try to analyze humor too much, so we won't do that tonight, but we will celebrate the cartoonists, satirists, and humorists of all kinds who seek to use their clever voices to speak truth to power and thus promote a democratic culture. We will hear specifically from representatives from China, Mexico, Venezuela, Nigeria, Iraq, and of course, honor a favorite son of Soweto, South Africa. I want to thank you all again for coming out and sharing this evening with us and for your continued support for the work of NDI around the world. Now, to begin this evening's program, please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Mexican comedian Chumel Torres. Thank you.
El licenciado presidente don Enrique Peña Nieto y su mano impoluta y perfecta. Y su incansable gobierno reformista, buscador de la verdad, faro de la democracia. La tendencia de ciertos periódicos cuando acaba de pasar algo súper grande y todo el mundo está hablando de eso, excepto los periódicos de mayor circulación. Una campaña avalada por medios de comunicación masivo del cual dependen muchísimas personas. ¿Dónde he visto esto? ¿Dónde? Me super suena, güey, pero no sé dónde. ¿Quién sabe? Fíjate, nos han ofrecido dinero de no dinero. Bueno, sí dinero. Desde partidos políticos nos han hablado para querer meter una nota adentro del Pulso. Les hemos dicho respetuosamente que a su madre, pero no me voy a decir antes de recordarles como cada semana, ¿qué? Los amo, estupetes.
Hi everyone, good night. Thank you very much. My name is Chumel Torres. I come from Mexico. Thank you very much for the NDI, and thank you, Madam Secretary. And my name is Chumel Torres. That's not my real name. My name is Jose Manuel, but it's just my nickname, and comedians go by our nicknames. I have this show. It's called El Pulso de la República. It translates to the heartbeat of the Republic. And for me, political satire has changed my life. It saved my life so many times. And because I didn't start as a comedian, I don't have any formation in communications or whatever. I'm a mechanical engineer. I used to work in a catheter company. Yeah, it's not a sexy job, but if you haven't died from 2002 through 2011, thank you. You're welcome, I guess. And and I started my Twitter account just by mocking politicians and talking funny of them. And then I discovered, okay, these guys are really dumb and I can be really funny. So at that time, I used to live in a really small town in Chihuahua, which is in the north of Mexico. And I come from a very humble and very proud family, so we didn't have a computer at the time. So I used the computer of my work to watch Jon Stewart. And then the first time I saw this guy, I was just like, Jesus, man, this is what I want to do for life. And then I worked from 9 to 5, and then from 5 p.m. to 9, I just watched every clip I could on The Daily Show or The Colbert Report or Bill Maher or whatever was that at the time. And I said, I think I want to do this for life, since political comedy is not a very popular thing in Mexico, since almost every media is pro-government. So what I did is that I saved some money, and I bought a phone, and then I started the show in the back of my car. I taped the cell phone and put a suit and start doing the show just for myself. And the thing was that it became very popular. And then I quit my day job. And yeah, my father was like, "What the hell are you going to do?" "Oh, Daddy, I'm going to be the next Jon Stewart." "Who is that guy?" "Bring him over." And at first, I remember when I started this crazy thing in YouTube, some of my friends and some not very friendly guys in Twitter said, "You just want to be like Jon Stewart or Colbert or John Oliver?" And I was just like, "Yeah, exactly." And the thing is that I copied every aspect of them because I admired him so much, even the gray hair. And what I often say is that 7 years ago I started this channel, and I used to be a cover band, but I was finding my own voice. And the thing is that I think it's a very good thing to copy your idols, and that's just what I did. So the channel became very popular. We became to get a lot of traction, and by the 2012 election, we had 2.4 million subscribers, and 1 of every 2 millennials were getting the news out of us. So that's when the TV networks start calling. And by the time they started calling in, I said to every one of them, "I just need no censorship, and I need my script to be completely free. I mean, you can't revise it or scrap it." And to say that, to appeal to political freedom and freedom of speech, was practically like showing a cross to these vampires, and everybody walked away. And I was fine. I mean, we were doing very good with YouTube, and then HBO called, and we did HBO. But I said, "I'm doing HBO, but I'm still going to do YouTube, because I was a kid that didn't have HBO or Comedy Central, and I want some kid to watch us for free in our show and say, I want to be that guy." Thank you. So we are now in our 5th season with HBO, in our 13th season of YouTube, and we're just hit the number 2 in the most heard shows in radio nationwide. And we need humor. We need satire, because it's the only way we can mock off the bullies. And we have a lot of bullies. And now I can say, to really hard work and a lot of scripts and a lot of airtime, I'm not longer a cover band. I have my own voice, but it was thanks to guys like John and Stephen and these amazing writers that we do what we do. And that's me in Washington now. What the hell? Thank you.
Please welcome Matt Wuerker of Politico.
Good evening. I'm Matt Wuerker, and I have perhaps the easiest job in Washington, D.C. I draw political cartoons about Washington, D.C. And I am here tonight with an esteemed group of international cartoonists to represent political cartooning, a field that some people think is endangered, but actually, if you look around the world, is actually an important aspect of free society. Humor is a funny thing. I mean, humor's a funny thing. And not in the way you think I mean. It's a funny thing in that it works in very strange ways. When it comes to political humor, it's funny how something funny can also be deadly serious. This is especially true in countries where democracy is fragile or in peril, and it's something that political cartoonists in many countries around the world grapple with every time they put pen to paper. I serve on the board of Cartoonist Rights Network International, a small NGO that helps cartoonists around the world who get into trouble for being too funny in countries where being funny about politics is a serious thing. We have a manual for cartoonists around the world that CRNI produced, and there's a passage from that I think sums up sort of what Derek was saying earlier. For the tyrant, the most dangerous result of the cartoonist toolbox is laughter. Insecure heads of state, leaders of failing regimes, political parties that cannot manage their countries, and often corrupt religious leaders do not normally tolerate people laughing at them. A nation of people laughing is a dangerous condition for the tyrant, demonstrating to the world that the people do not fear their leader. That's why when it comes to gauging freedom of speech around the world, political humor offers us a really good measuring stick. Tolerance of political satire is a hallmark of democracy and open societies. When the opening for joking about political leadership begins to close down, it's a very bad sign. It's because of that that political cartoonists are often the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to threats to democracy. From Syrian cartoonist Ali Ferzat, who was horribly beaten and both his hands broken when he dared to draw cartoons ridiculing the Assad at the beginning of the Arab Spring in Syria, to Musa Kart, who was thrown in jail for daring to draw Turkey's Erdogan as a cat tangled up in a ball of yarn. It seems that the wannabe tyrants often come after the cartoonists first. So today we brought together some renowned canaries from that coal mine here to talk a little bit about their work on the front lines of the battle for freedom of speech. So come on up, guys. We're going down. So while they're getting settled, I will start with introducing Rayma Suprani, who has worked for a number of newspapers in Venezuela, including El Diario Economica and El Diario de Caracas. The critic Alfonso Molina praised her work, writing, quote, "The work of Rayma Suprani and El Universal unites intelligence, sensitivity, and talent to express our life in a country through very sharp vignettes that are not intended to make us laugh, but to make us think. For 19 years, she did cartoons for El Universal, but in 2014, she was fired for a cartoon that criticized the legacy of Hugo Chavez and the Venezuelan healthcare system. Rayma was awarded the Inter-American Society Press Prize in 2005 and the Pedro Leon Zapata Prize as Venezuela's best cartoonist in 2000 and also in 2009. This year, she was awarded the Václav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent. No. If I have the slides right, Kevin Kallaugher is next. Kevin is the award-winning cartoonist for The Economist and the Baltimore Sun. He's been doing that's not Kevin's, that's mine. Well, finally we found something funny to talk about. Next slide, please. Kevin Kallaugher is the award-winning cartoonist for The Economist and the Baltimore Sun. He's been doing the editorial cartoon as well as gracing the covers of The Economist for 41 years. We're talking more than 8,000 cartoons. A fabulous collection of his cartoons is now in the form of a gorgeous and hefty book, Daggers Drawn, and he's also a featured cartoonist in Counterpoint, a great new online cartoon newsletter devoted to political cartoons. If you like political cartoons, you should subscribe to it. It's free. The World Encyclopedia of Cartoons said of Cal, commanding a masterful style, Kallaugher stands among the premier caricaturists of the 20th century. Kevin Kallaugher, ladies and gentlemen, at the end.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rebel Pepper is a renowned cartoonist who started out working in China. His commentary on political and social issues has a large following across much of Asia. His trenchant cartoons drew the wrath of the Chinese Communist Party, and in 2014, he was forced to leave his home. After a few years in Japan, he moved with his family to the US. He now draws cartoons for Radio Free Asia. He is the winner of the hashtag Index Award and the Sigma Delta Chi Award. Welcome, Rebel.
Bravo.
So we're going to do a few questions here and show a few cartoons and talk about the world that these people work in. So I'm going to start with Rayma. Can you tell us about working as a cartoonist in Venezuela? You lost your newspaper job after making fun of Chavez and now work online and from outside of Venezuela. How do you reach your readers? And do you still face pushback from the regime in Caracas?
Bueno, yo creo que el humor traspasa mucho porque el humor es un reflejo de la sociedad que nos, digamos, que nos rodea. El humor es como contar toda la película con un solo cuadro y la caricatura editorial tiene un gran poder porque como cada día hay menos tiempo para leer, pues estamos conectados con el poder de la imagen, con el poder de la risa y con el poder de la reflexión. Eso es una gran responsabilidad y nosotros nos ha tocado pues traducir todo el acontecer histórico en las páginas de los diarios y ahora en la web.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I think humor is something that touches everything, and it's a reflection of what is happening in society. In one single panel, you're showing an entire picture. It's like telling an entire movie in a panel. And what's important is that political cartoons specifically have power. That's the power of the image, it's the power of laughter, and we cartoonists have a huge responsibility. We are the ones who translate what is happening in our countries, where we are, and we do it with humor, and it's something that we need to keep on.
And you do this from, where do you live now? You don't live in Caracas.
No, trabajo, ahora vivo en Florida y trabajo desde mi casa. Ahora soy mi propia editora y creo que la autopista de la web nos ha dado a muchos ilustradores y caricaturistas censurados una autopista importante para expresarnos.
And, oh, I'm sorry.
Right now, I'm living in Florida, and I work from home. So I am basically my own editor right now. And I think what the internet has given to all of us, cartoonists, people who do political satire, political humor, is a road or some type of pathway without censorship. And I think that that's been really important for our work.
I understand that, like our president, you discovered the power of Twitter. How many Twitter followers do you have?
Ya casi 1 millón. Me siento
million.
muy perseguida por eso.
I have nearly 1 million now, and I feel like I'm a bit persecuted because of that.
Wait, you want 2 million or no?
No lo sé, creo que son muchas bocas que alimentar y muchos cerebros que...
I don't know, that's a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of brains to feed.
Let's see, we'll move over to Cal here. So, Cal, you've been slinging ink for many years, and you probably have the largest international following of any cartoonist working today. What is it about cartoons that makes them work across cultures and borders? And what is it about cartoons that makes them cause so much trouble around the world?
Well, first, before I answer, I just want to say what an honor it is to be with such a distinguished crew of colleagues and cartoonists. We live in kind of a small community. We all kind of know each other. At least we know each other's work, but we don't often have an opportunity to meet with them. So it's interesting about how cartoons can penetrate across cultures in such a way, partly because humor, there's a lot of things that are universal in humor, I've discovered, jokes that kind of work in lots of different places. So there's an example, there's this joke from the Cold War, a cartoonist joke, where an American cartoonist and a Russian cartoonist are in a bar together. And they are talking about, their relative lives, as cartoonists do. And so the American says, in my country, I can draw the President of the United States whenever I want to. And the Russian cartoonist thought for a second. He says, in my country, we have the exact same situation. We can draw your president whenever we want to. So humor can kind of cross borders because there's a lot of similar sort of sense of humor. Well, the key thing, though, is what is it that makes cartoons particularly damaging or hot topics in any given culture. And there's several things that you alluded to in the introduction. Humor has this interesting place. But there's this other element that's unique to cartoons. and that is they're visual, and they often involve drawing the face of powerful people. Because the face is the most valuable thing that we all own. It's a distinguishing characteristic, and plus it's part of the brand of the individual leaders involved. And if you have a bunch of 6-year-olds like us taking their faces, pulling them apart, and reassembling them in ways that we have control, they really resent it. And it's not just them, but it's their tribe, their supporters, and they come at you. And to add to that is they don't know how to respond to a cartoon because they can't draw cartoons. So they get angry and frustrated, and I think that kind of bubbles up a lot of anxiety.
Rebel. I imagine working inside China as an independent cartoonist was a bit tricky. Does political humor have a place in the official media in China? And does the Communist Party have much of a sense of humor?
Sorry, my English is not that good, so my friend can translation for me. 1949年之后，那么中国有一个比较短暂的政治幽默的空间，大概是从1980年改革开放开始到1989年天安门大屠杀这个时候就结束了。那么政治漫画家在中国现在是很少的，特别是在习近平上台之后，他们很难有勇气继续创作下去。共产党是根本没有幽默感的，他们必须始终假装自己是神圣不可侵犯的，他们甚至不能容忍对最高领导人的一点点的嘲弄。如果我现在回中国，我可能会被判处10年以上，甚至是无期徒刑。
So, since the founding of Communist China in 1949, there's only been a very short amount of time where there was space for political humor, and that was in 1980 to 1989, which ended with the Tiananmen Square massacre. So, there aren't very many political cartoonists or humorists now, especially since Xi Jinping has been in power. The Communist Party has no sense of humor at all.
Yes.
They must pretend to be sacred and inviolable, and they can't tolerate even a little sense of humor about any supreme leader. So, if I returned to China now, I would probably be sentenced to at least 10 years in prison or life in prison.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but you're like Rayma in that you use social media to reach an audience inside China?
OK， 我在推特上发表作品，然后我一般刚刚发表的作品就很快就会被收录在中国的敏感图库里边，然后在中国的社交媒体上被完全封锁。所以因为受到这样严密的监控呢，我基本上已经放弃了在中国的读者。然后作为在中国长大的漫画家，为了让更多的英语读者看到我的作品，我现在是将创作的重点转移到这个中美关系上。然后我现在大部分作品也都是中英文双语的，然后社交媒体对我来说是非常重要的，我每天都通过社交媒体浏览很多信息，然后根据我感兴趣也是公众舆论的热点话题来创作漫画。
So the work that I publish on Twitter now gets censored in China almost immediately. So he'll post it on Twitter, and then in China's database of sensitive images, it'll be there almost immediately. So his friends can't post it on WeChat or something like that. So because of such strict monitoring, he's basically given up on his previously huge Chinese audience. As a cartoonist who grew up in China, who now lives in the US, he needs to enable more English speakers to see his work and to understand his work. So he's shifted his focus to be on China-US relations. And his works are starting to be more bilingual. So social media is very important for him. He reads a lot of information on social media every day, creates cartoons almost in real time based on the news that he's seeing on social media and hot topics.
Thanks for that. So we should get back to cartoons and use some cartoons to talk about cartooning. So we have a couple of favorite cartoons. I think we're starting with one of Rayma's that political cartooning is not always going for the laugh. And this seems like a really good example of that. So Rayma, would you tell us a little bit about what prompted this cartoon?
Bueno, es una representación de una imagen que fue muy ruda, que fue la imagen del niño sirio, el segundo niño sirio que salió en los medios y que fue una especie de agresión en la imagen. Creo que a veces nos dicen qué caricatura tan dura, no podemos reír de eso, la gente se siente un poco molesta porque el dibujo no provoca risa y porque proyecta una realidad muy cruda. Pero siempre me cuestiono por qué no lo ven en la realidad y sí lo ven en el dibujo. Creo que el arte, en este caso pues el Guernica de Picasso, representa mucho lo que podríamos utilizar como una iconografía universal para vincularlo como un efecto repetitivo pues, de las nuevas guerras.
Well, this particular cartoon, first you see represented the Syrian boy. This was the second Syrian boy who really came out in the news. And it's a very harsh, almost aggressive image. And there were a lot of people who were quite bothered by this image because it didn't make them laugh. It didn't make them laugh because it was showing a very crude reality. And I thought it was interesting that people could see that harsh and crude reality in this image, yet they couldn't see it in real life. And I put that against the backdrop of Picasso's Guernica, which is a universal representation of the horrors of war and these types of attacks that keep repeating. And so this is something that we continue to see.
It's an amazing image. It's really great. Now we'll go to the humorous side of the spectrum with Cal. I believe we have one of his.
Yeah, so this cartoon is not particularly controversial. I just went a bit of topical. You can see, and this tells kind of 10 years of American foreign policy in 5 panels. And kind of very relevant to what's going on today. But one of the interesting things when Matt, when you bring up the thing about a controversial cartoon that might have gotten you in trouble, one of the interesting things when you, as I do, work both in a UK environment with The Economist and the Baltimore Sun in the US environment, shows the amount of protections that we have as cartoonists here, and something that we so much take for granted. And I was kind of, this kind of came to rest with me in another Russian story, as it happens. A few years ago, I had the privilege to be addressing some audiences in St. Petersburg, Russia. And I have spent a lot of time going to various different countries, talking to groups about freedom of expression, satire, and cartoons are in the front line of these elements. And so I was showing a bunch of cartoons to a university group, and we were there as cartoons criticizing, Bush and Clinton, Obama, and Trump hadn't arrived yet. At the end of it, there was the Q&A, and as tradition would have it, the professor gives the first question. And he says, "Did you get permission from these guys to have these cartoons, drawing this sort of stuff?" And I said, "Well, actually, we have this thing called a constitution that protects us in this way." And the room broke into spontaneous applause.
Wow. Mm.
And it just shows how much, it reminded me how something that we take so much for granted, and not only do a very few people on the planet today have this opportunity and freedom, but also in the history of mankind, just a virtual nanosecond of people have had this opportunity to do this. And for that, I feel enormously privileged to do what I do and be able to do it where I do it.
Mm-hmm. No, it's really true. And that reminds me, there's a great backstory to, we do have the First Amendment, but then we also have a Supreme Court precedent. In Hustler v. Falwell, which was decided 30 years ago, was a case where Jerry Falwell decided he was going to sue Larry Flynt and Hustler magazine for making fun of him. And it went all the way to the US Supreme Court, which at the time was run by William Rehnquist. And you would think that the choice between the pornographer and the preacher, it would be fairly clear which side they were going to pick. But it turned out that Rehnquist, in his high school yearbook, had written that he wanted to grow up and be a cartoonist. And he had a soft spot for political cartooning, and the Rehnquist court in Hustler v. Falwell basically said, if you're in politics, you're fair game, and you can't sue for emotional distress. And it's thanks to Mr. Rehnquist that we continue to enjoy a lot of freedom and liberty as cartoonists.
That's right.
So we have one more cartoon to show here, Rebels. I understand that President Xi is now, he's very sensitive about being caricatured as Winnie the Pooh. No, this is true, but you went a little bit harder here than Winnie the Pooh, Adam.
说解释这个话 ，OK， 那我创作这篇话是因为我觉得很可悲的现象是说，大部分中国人在被长期的中共的洗脑宣传教育之后呢，都丧失了思考和质疑的能力，他们已经变成了中国政府的帮凶，就很像那个美国电视剧《行尸走肉》里边那个救世军里边所说的啊，他们每个人都是那个。
So he said that sadly, most Chinese have lost the ability to think critically and don't have the freedom to question. So this is the result of long-term brainwashing. They have become accomplices of the Chinese government through this process. And he made the comparison to the TV show The Walking Dead, where there's a group of zombies called the Saviors, and they all wear the face of Negan.
Yes.
Well, I know that we're between you and your dinners, so first I want to thank the panelists for showing up and sharing their work, and it's a real pleasure and honor. And I want to leave you with a question, which is basically that clearly political satire depends on freedom and democracy and open society. But in some ways, open societies and democracy also depends on political satire, doesn't it? So anyway, thank you very much.
All right.
Please remain seated while dinner is served. Please welcome Nkechi Nwabudike.
Hi, my name is Nkechi Nwabudike. Until very recently, I was the producer for The Other News. The Other News has been described as the daily show of Nigeria. I don't know that I would agree, but we did do something similar. Roll the tape.
Yeah, my name is Okay. This is the show that you've been waiting for. America want to fight North Korea because their leaders want to find out who has the biggest button in the land. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the only thing that can cause fights with other countries is jollof rice.
This is my card.
Okay.
I am saying to the existing political class, game over. Get off the page.
Wow.
What is politics and governance about? Is it to serve or is it to eat? Is it to loot or is it to work for the people? If it's to work for the people, then you will not care whether women are there or not. But it's because in Nigeria, government office is to steal.
Election day was an opportunity for the youth to come out en masse and vote for councillors and chairmen that will represent them. So thousands of youths woke up that early morning in spite of the rain and did what young people do best. Tweet from their beds.
Okay, so thank you. The Other News is a show that was created when Pilot Media Initiatives, an American company that specializes in comedy for change, met a Nigerian TV pioneer who'd created the country's largest TV network, Channels TV. I joined the show as a writer, and they quickly promoted me to head writer. And somehow, because they're very smart people, I ended up running the first 4 seasons of the show. So a comedy show like this, a show that used comedy to address politics and news, had never been done in Nigeria, and we wondered why. Because Nigerians love comedy, but traditionally in Nigeria, comedy is done just for comedy's sake. But But Nigeria also has a large number of people who consume a lot of global political satire. So the question for us became, why not comedy? Why couldn't comedy be used as a democratic tool in Nigeria? Most of Nigeria's 180 million people are under the age of 30. And this is the population that has the least participation in politics. This is also the population that we tend to mock every day because they're millennials and they don't get involved. But the truth is they also consume a lot of global news, and they're not immune from what we call the daily show effect. So if you entertain these people, they will listen to what you have to say. So using that, we created The Other News, and The Other News found a home amongst this population. But it hasn't been easy. Nigeria is technically a democracy, but our democracy is far from ideal. So we faced issues of censorship. One time in particular, we wrote a segment that targeted one particular politician who has a reputation of having people kidnapped. And we were warned and we were advised, but we had the backing of the station, so we went ahead and we aired this. And we did receive some threats, but we still showed up for work the next day. And when we were not the target of censors and threats, we also had a very important population that had a voice, and we had to please this population, and that was our audience, because they had very definite opinions. There were those who wanted us to constantly attack politicians and leaders, and then there were those who felt that we were going too hard, and it was really very difficult to please them. I don't know if you know a lot about Nigerian politics, but our partisan politics is getting extremely extreme, which might sound familiar to you. So party faithfuls on both sides would wait until Thursday nights every week to yell at the top of their voice how a segment was pro-government or pro-opposition, and sometimes it would be the exact same segment. And sometimes they wouldn't even watch the show before they all got angry about whatever it was they were supposed to get angry about. So we created this show. In spite of all these hurdles, though, The Other News has been very successful. We found an audience, and we helped to inform them and inspire them to engage with politics and also each other in a socially acceptable manner. Because it's easier at the end of the day to share a joke that you heard on TV than it is to share an analysis you watched or you read in the paper, if you're above 70 and still read the papers. And we have proof of that. We conducted a research with PMI, and we found that people who watch The Other News are more likely to learn about what is going on in politics than people who watch regular shows. People who watch satire find it more shareable with their friends and families. And after watching The Other News, Nigerians are more likely to demand accountability from their leaders. We assumed when we started this show that our audience was going to be between the age of 18 and 35, and they were, but they were also 15, they were 55, 75. We had a wide range of people watching this show across the country, across all geopolitical zones and age. We created a hit. Some episodes of the show had over 2 million people watching, and we had 20% of the audience share. It's a show that we created, and we managed to use it to inspire a lot of Nigerians. The idea of comedy is global, but the mechanics of comedy is local, and I think that's what the true magic of comedy is. It's certainly why we were able to create a show that was not just a huge success, but a show that created a platform for Nigerians to demand better and to use it as a vehicle to change their country and change their world for the better. So you might call The Other News the daily show of Nigeria. We certainly won't stop you, but we're looking forward to the day when other countries can say they have their version of The Other News. I'll be watching until then. Thank you very much.
Please welcome NDI board member Pat Griffin.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to introduce the most famous person in the room, even including our special guest. As they say, she needs no introduction. However, I do. My name is Pat Griffin. I just retired as an officer of the board after some 25 years. Thank you. Had I known my departure might have gotten me a chance to introduce a superstar, I might have left earlier. My association with NDI actually precedes that of Secretary Albright's, even though she was the founding vice chairman of the board, chairwoman of the board. My introduction to NDI first occurred when the enabling legislation, the legislation that made this NDI and its partners possible, was nothing more than a twinkle in President Reagan's eye. and not yet law. Out of the blue, a good friend of mine, Brian Atwood, some of you might know, who was on the board, who was working for Senator Benson there. I never understood that connection, but at the time asked me in my capacity as Secretary of the Democratic Caucus if I could find out why this legislation was stuck for so long on the Senate calendar. He indicated that he knew that the legislation was being held up by an anonymous Democrat. Rob Lipitor and I worked together on these matters for Senator Byrd, and we knew that it's never what it appears to be. I quickly came to learn very few Democrats liked this bill and what Reagan was proposing, so it could have been anybody. It didn't take long to find out Senator Long from Louisiana had put a hold on the bill because someone, actually on the Republican side, had put a hold on a little sugar bill, price support bill, which was very important to him. I told my Republican counterparts that I could probably unstuck the Reagan signature bill if they would release the hold on the sugar bill. After some back and forth, they did. Senator Long got his little old sugar bill, and as part of the deal, we allowed the legislation that would enable NDI and its partners to come to the floor for a vote and then go directly to the president for his signature. That was 1984, 85, I guess? 84. In the end, I had hoped that I had pleased Brian, my buddy, not having a clue of what was in the bill, or what I just helped launch in an inadvertent way, kind of like Chauncey Gardner. Boom. I did get to know Secretary Albright, though. I didn't get to know her in the context of NDI for a while. But I did get to know Madeleine before she was Madeleine. And we were introduced through a mutual friend named Francis O'Brien. It was a very casual relationship where we occasionally had lunch and dinner. She seemed like a really smart person, funny, with whom I'd shared a number of similar professional experiences. She had worked for Senator Muskie. I had worked for Senator Byrd. She was a political operative who worked for Mondale in the Mondale campaign and as advisor to Ferraro in the Dukakis campaign, where I worked as well. She had an appointment at Georgetown, and I had a faculty appointment at the University of Wisconsin before coming to D.C. She also worked in the White House in legislative affairs under President Jimmy Carter. I didn't know it at the time, but I would share that professional experience with her as well when I ultimately went to work in the Legislative Affairs Office of Bill Clinton. Actually, it was at that point when our professional paths actually crossed, and then dramatically departed. As you all know, she became the UN ambassador to the U.S. ambassador to the UN, ultimately the first woman Secretary of State for the United States, and I became Director of Legislative Affairs. Her path revealed her brilliance both in her command of international affairs and in her mastery of the art of diplomacy. She made our country a beacon of leadership, integrity around the world. Her personal wit and charm built relationships with world leaders that endure today. My path, on the other hand, took me to the swamp, where I have happily been for the last 2 decades. In closing, what I've learned since that time and being on the board with Madeleine on the board of NDI, and probably something that you guys don't know, but the secretary really is a hill rat. Jerry Hartz, I'm sure, is here, and many others know what that means. It means she has a natural instinct for how the Congress works in terms of its players, its process, politics, and then that puts folks like me and Jerry to shame. She walks through the halls of Congress, and the crowds part as if she's a Hollywood diva. While she graciously accepts their accolades, she knows she's walking through the trenches of warfare, absorbing all she can about the congressional dynamic that may potentially affect her purpose for being there. She's always fully engaged with her team, calculating what needs to be done in this current environment to ensure resources are available to protect and promote democracy around the world. With great gratitude, I give you Secretary Albright.
you. Thank you very much. Pat, thank you. I can't thank you enough for those wonderful words of introduction, but I thank you most of all for your incredible service to the cause of democracy and to our country. As you just said, we've known each other for a very long time, and I can tell you the extent to which we relied on Pat in the Clinton administration to maintain good relations with Congress. Not always easy. It was an assignment that has often been compared then and now to herding cats. I say that intending no disrespect to the distinguished members of Congress who are here with us tonight, or to the cats. I recall meetings in the Situation Room where Pat delivered a very tough message, but he always did it with such grace in keeping very much in terms of the themes of tonight, which is humor. And after we left the government, Pat joined me on the NDI board, and he really has played an invaluable role in helping us maintain a strong bipartisan support for democracy assistance on Capitol Hill. And I was very sad when he called and said that he was going to step down, so there is no way to express our gratitude, Pat, for everything that you've done for NDI and for our incredible friendship and for, in fact, interpreting Congress to us, even those of us that work there, because it always needs interpreting, and it is always fun to hear from somebody that is a professional in understanding the importance of executive-legislative relations. So thank you very, very much. Also, it's really nice to be introduced by a friend that you'll see again. I'm pleased to see so many familiar faces in the audience tonight, not only from the NDI board and Congress, but also from the diplomatic corps and longtime partners from government, the media, academia, and civil society. This is NDI's 36th year, and nothing makes us prouder than the networks we've built, and one of the ways we do that is by inviting people to dinner. Among the friends that we're delighted to welcome this evening is the legendary pianist and composer Herbie Hancock, who has been Derek mentioned him, but I have to say that Herbie is somebody that I've gotten to know and to be really, really good friends with, because I believe that music is a part of foreign policy, and we have no better ambassadors than jazz players who describe America better than anybody, and Herbie is really the ambassador of jazz to the world, so thank you. Music breaks down barriers, and unlike words, there is no need for translation, and so there is no way to thank Herbie enough for everything that you've done for cultural diplomacy, and it's just wonderful, and I treasure our friendship more than I can tell you. This has already been a remarkable evening, and I am truly grateful to NDI President Derek Mitchell, Sherry Bryan, James Vanderklok, Kirsten Tellen, and everyone else at NDI for all that it takes to make this dinner a success, and I would vote this one a truly great success. Even taking account of the Mystics and the Nationals, they are, for my money, the best team in town. Speaking of money, I also want to thank NDI supporters, and because of your generosity, this dinner has broken a record set just last year by raising more than $1 million to support our work in more than 70 countries around the world. Thank you all very, very much. We have also broken records for attendance, and again, part of the reason is that we feed people, but an even bigger reason is that we're fighting for a cause that matters and are having a very good time doing it. And tonight, as we highlight the role of humor as the most democratic form of speech, I can't help but think of the time I was asked to deliver my first comedic routine. Fear not, I won't repeat it here. But the thing that happened, just as I had become ambassador to the United Nations, Helen Thomas came up to me as I was buying new clothes at Rizik's and asked me to address the annual dinner of the Gridiron Club because she was the first woman president of it and she wanted to have a woman speaker. And as some of you know, this is a show run by the Press Corps and it's known for songs, skits, and jokes. So I just had one question and I said, why me? And she actually said because Hillary and Liddy Dole had already turned her down. And so I said, but you know, it's really not my thing. And she said, don't worry, you know, we can really find somebody to help you do this. And so I didn't really want to embarrass myself. And so she said, nobody writes their own material and I'll find someone to help you. So I'm sitting in New York and all of a sudden I get a phone call from somebody saying that he was asked to call me because he was supposed to help me do this. And he said, so what kind of a sense of humor do you have? And I said, well, kind of dry. And then he said, you do know I charge a lot of money. And I said, well, I'm so sorry, but I don't have the money. And he said, well, I have no idea who you are, so I'm not going to do it. I did manage to get away with it because I started out by saying, who am I and why am I here? And I did get quite a lot of laughs. And to my relief, it really went quite well. But what I loved was, as we all know, the powerhouse lawyer Vernon Jordan, he said to me later that in order to be taken seriously in Washington, you have to be funny. The statement has been on my mind in the run-up to tonight's dinner because we can't escape the fact that we're living in deadly serious times. Democracy is undergoing a most challenging stress test. And in too many countries today, authoritarian leaders have grabbed the pendulum of history and are trying to swing it into reverse. They want to see civil society repressed, journalists in jail, judicial systems without independence, and elections drained of their meaning. They also want to see voices of positive change drowned out and reasoned debate impossible because fascists use large megaphones and they thrive amid division and silence. Democracy, however, depends on people who have the space and courage to speak up, join together, and fight back against injustice. It depends on people who refuse to be intimidated or to bury their ideals. People who insist on truth, who expose bullies for what they are, and refuse to be controlled by fear. People such as those we have heard from tonight, and people who know that to be taken seriously, you first have to be funny. By celebrating these comedians and satirists, we're not looking to distract or make light of the problems facing democracy. Instead, we aim to highlight one of the tools that we small d Democrats have in our arsenal. Now, I'm told by my new comedian friends that explaining jokes is like dissecting a frog. You may learn something from it, but the frog dies in the process. So I'm not going to explain anything, except to say that from Mark Twain to Will Rogers and Dick Gregory to Whoopi Goldberg, humor has been used to tell inconvenient truths in ways that unmask the arrogant and corrupt and enable us to see our own opportunities and responsibilities in a fresh light. Our honoree this evening is part of this proud tradition. Trevor Noah is one of the world's most intelligent and incisive satirists. Born to a black mother and a white father, he grew up in South Africa during the last gasps of apartheid and the tumultuous days of freedom that came with its demise. He established himself as the most successful comedian in Africa and became, in 2015, the host of America's leading comedy news show. In that role, he has brought a global perspective into our living rooms, exploring the world's injustices and follies with just the right combination of wit and wits. Trevor's brilliant memoir, Born a Crime, was released in 2016 and quickly rose to the top of the bestseller list. It is brutally honest account of life under apartheid, but it's also a moving tribute to his mother, Patricia, whose love and sacrifice enabled Trevor to overcome so much. Earlier this year, Trevor released a version of the book adapted for young readers, providing a new generation with an honest perspective on South Africa's racial history and with plenty of inspiration to improve their own lives. Last year, he launched the Trevor Noah Foundation, which is a youth development initiative that enhances preparedness for higher education or entry into the workforce. It's an example of a program that is helping a democracy deliver for its citizens, and it is yet another reason why Trevor is so deserving of NDI's Leadership in Democracy Award. One of the things that I've learned during my brief career in comedy is that funny speeches are supposed to have serious endings. So during my appearance at the Gridiron, I closed with a reference to President Clinton's Arkansas hometown, invoked during his campaign as a place called Hope. As I said then, I was 11 years old when I arrived in America from a neighborhood in Prague where I was born called Smíchov, which happens to be the Czech word for laughter. And I would like to say tonight that no matter how difficult the world becomes, I still believe in a place called Smíchov. I still believe that to be taken seriously, you first have to be funny, and that's why I couldn't be happier to be appearing alongside all of these men and women. They are talented, they are fearless, and they are seriously funny. And in that spirit, please welcome the co-creator of the Albasheer show and the new Iraqi political comedy, Puppets Republic, Hussam Hadi. Hussam?
Good evening. My name is Hussam Hadi. I'm from one of the most toughest area in the world called the Middle East. And I'm from Iraq. I'm a nervous little bit because I'm not a performer. I'm a writer, I'm a producer, I'm the cooker, the guy who made the political satire. So I think that since Trevor Noah is a performer, so I would like to introduce Trevor Noah. Video, please.
Hello, National Democratic Institute. Wow, I haven't seen this many Washington politicians in one place since the last flight to Ukraine. I don't really look like Trevor. And I don't sound like Trevor. Here in Puppetland, I'm practically Idris Elba. What Hussam is doing with his puppets means a lot to me, because Hussam and I are cut from the same cloth. Only mine is made at a factory in Shanghai. Roll 212. What do you mean this isn't my show? Roll 212.
Satire has never been as popular in Iraq as it is now, even though it's an extremely dangerous game to play. This is what it looks like and why it's been doing so well.
Iranian. What's up, bro?
In 2019, up to 5 comedy shows have appeared on YouTube's list of top 10 most viewed Iraqi channels, including the Albasheer show. The show is a hit with the Iraqi youth, and it's influenced by US shows that ridicule those in power.
We use the same methodology of Jon Stewart and we apply it to the Iraqi news. The result is unbelievable. And you know, the conflict in Iraq, their political nature there, it's very rich to make a satire content. That's why I created another project, Puppets Republic.
Jingle bell, jingle all the way.
الأخ عبيد كان يشتمك طوال الحلقة وأنت بس شاطر تقول في الحقيقة.
بالثانية، مو المرة الثانية، الولاية الثانية.
شنو؟ تريد الثانية أنت من كل عقلك؟
I believe all the politicians in Iraq, there are hands that's moving them. That's why I named it Puppets Republic, which is really reflects what's happening in Iraq. There is no financial sustainability for any independent media project unless you go to one of the political parties and you start to talk about the party enemies, the others. So, and this is not a media for me.
Thank you. So, yes, I work in puppets every day. And guys, you are from DC, right? So you're familiar about this feeling. So Iraq is my home. I'm from Iraq. And in 2006, I was kidnapped by extremists. And yes, sometimes when the human have a problem, he can use it like to break him or to make him more stronger. So I choose to be more stronger and fight the extremism. Thank you. Fight the extremism, the corruption, and trying to give a hope for the new generation in my country. And I believe the change will happen not only in Iraq, but in all our area when the youth be involved in politics. Our area is 60% less than 22 years old. We are a young generation. And in order to make them involved in politics, the political satire was the way, and we succeed in Iraq. I want to thank you guys for, thanks first, Mr. Secretary, to give me this chance to talk about my experience. But while I'm talking now, on the 25th in Baghdad, there will be a big, uprising. A lot of youth, they are requesting just employment, some basic stuff that the government, they can't give. And unfortunately, I'm just afraid a lot of friends, they will be maybe in the prison. So I just want to be the voice of the voiceless people. They are youth and they deserve to live. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, Hussam, and of course, Puppet Trevor. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present NDI's Leadership in Democracy Award to the actual Trevor Noah.
Thank you, and good evening. Firstly, thank you, Secretary Albright, for ambushing me at an event in Seattle and telling me that I would be here. I grew up in a country where I was raised, and we were raised by many powerful, amazing women, and Secretary Albright, you would fit right in as an African mother. You really would. So thank you very much for having me here. Hussam, thank you very much for that beautiful portrayal of myself. I think we share a lot in common. I, too, live in a very dangerous place known as the United States. And it really has been quite a journey for me. I'm not going to lie. You know, I grew up in a country where, as many of you know, the apartheid laws restricted freedom of speech. You know, everything from songs that were deemed to be political through to comedy that was expressly political. I didn't have much access to satire. I did not grow up knowing that you could say whatever you wanted about your government. And I was lucky that when I was young, apartheid ended. And you know, I started seeing people saying what they felt. I started seeing people expressing who they were, speaking out about what was happening around them. And the most magical thing I saw them do was they made people laugh while doing it. And laughter for me has always been a powerful tool, because I always believe it is the core essence of who we are. It reminds us of who we are as human beings. You're not afraid when you're laughing. You're no longer in shock when you're laughing. It truly is just you at your core. It's why your laugh sounds as ugly as it does. And I always loved that. I always loved the power of humor. I loved how people could use it to disarm those who would perceive them to be enemies. I loved how people could use it to bring people together towards a common goal. I remember one of the first times I saw comedy being told in an environment where I genuinely did not think it was. I was at a protest with my grandfather, and we're walking through the streets of Johannesburg, and I don't know what the protest was about. I don't know what the people were marching about. All I remember is I was with him in the streets, and there were policemen on horses. And there's something about a policeman on a horse that makes them even scarier than they may already be. And we would never walk close to the horses, and on this occasion, we got particularly close, my grandfather and I. My grandfather's a really boisterous, funny man. And he looked up at the policeman, and the policeman looked down at us, and he said, "Hey, get out of the bloody way, move." And my grandfather stopped. You know, this steely Hussam man, 70-something, 80-something years old, and he looked up at this policeman, and he said, "Master, can I ask you a question?" And I didn't know anything about the world, but I knew what he had just done could get us killed. You don't speak to a man on a horse. And my grandfather looked at him, and I have to give you a bit of context before I tell you what he said. The previous week in South Africa, we had our version of the Kentucky Derby. Horses run around, and somebody kisses the winning horse. And the person who had kissed the winning horse was the Prime Minister of South Africa. And I will never forget, my grandfather looked up at the policeman, and he said, "Master, I have a question for you. Why is it that your president can kiss a horse, but he won't kiss my sister?" And I was like, wow. Scathing and powerful. And I mean, as a child, I was just fascinated. I was like, wow, I mean, I don't even know what just happened here. And the policeman looked at him, and his eyes flared, and his nostrils rounded, and he looked at my grandfather, and he said, "What?" And I think the confusion and the curiosity got the better of him, because he said, "I don't know. Why?" And my grandfather said, "Because you haven't seen my sister." And I saw something in that moment that I genuinely never seen before. I saw that policeman laugh. He laughed from his belly in a way that he even didn't expect. He laughed with my grandfather, and I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen a white policeman laughing with a black anybody. And we left, and I remember as a child, I just remember thinking, wow, jokes are cool. You know, you can make people laugh. Jokes are cool. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized how brilliant that whole idea was. I didn't know what my grandfather was doing. I mean, in one fell swoop, in barely a few sentences, he had critiqued the very idea of apartheid South Africa. He had questioned the structure that had held him back for so long. And the manner in which he had done it got his oppressor to laugh with him, and he emerged from it unscathed. And I think it took me years and years of learning comedy and satire and the tools that we use to make people laugh to truly understand what he had done. I mean, I just first thought of it as a joke, and over the years I started to understand how amazing that little moment was. And that stuck with me. That's who I've been my whole life. That's who my family has been our whole lives. We've laughed through the tough times, you know, as a family, as a nation, you know, and we laughed as we celebrated the dawn of a new age in South Africa. I saw comedy come about. I saw black performers on stage for the very first time, performing to white people in South Africa. You know, and I saw for the first time the power that this medium has to unearth truths that people are so scared to speak about. And I was really lucky, and I always think I am lucky, because that birth of comedy in South Africa really sparked something interesting. And maybe it was because South Africa experienced a bloodless revolution, but we immediately had a burgeoning comedy community. We immediately had this beautiful, blossoming comedy industry, that was free to speak our minds. And here we were for the first time, black comedians and white comedians, black audience members, white audience members, Indian, colored, Asian, everyone together in one room telling truths using this medium. And some of those truths were painful. Some of them hit too close to home, but one thing that was always common was it made people laugh. And that was one of the first spaces in South Africa where we genuinely saw people coming together. I never thought of myself as a political comedian. I still don't, per se. And I remember when I moved from South Africa, a friend of mine said to me, "So you're going to America now to host the Daily Show?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm looking forward to the change. I've lived in a country for so long where we have a leader who has completely disregarded all of the norms and practices of what made this nation what it is today, and a leader who has enriched his family through unscrupulous means and continues to diminish everything that we have built this nation upon." And I said, "I'm looking forward to a break from that. I'm going to a first world country." And I came to the United States, and Barack Obama was president, and I was like, wow, this is going to be easy. This is sweet. It's not much to talk about, but we'll figure it out. And then 2016 happened, and so did my show. And a lot of people have said to me, they've gone like, "Trevor, do you think you'd be hosting the Daily Show if it weren't for Donald Trump? Do you think it would have been?" And the honest truth is no. And people go like, "So it's good for the Daily Show." I go, "No, it's not good for the Daily Show." I don't think any leader who is divisive and abrasive in the manner that Donald Trump is good for comedy. If anything, I think comedy is good for him. I think, and one thing I've always appreciated, especially in America, is the ability to laugh at a leader who does not want to be laughed at is one of the core pillars of freedom. It genuinely is. Because fundamentally, in my opinion, when you can laugh at somebody in power, it reminds them that they, like you, are still a human being who is accountable to other human beings. And once that gets removed, there is no more joke. There is no more laughter. There is no more funny. And so oftentimes I'm very careful, to stay away from the idea that comedy enables the freedom. No. The freedom enables the comedy. The comedy is a byproduct of that freedom. When you have the comedy, then you know that you have a certain element, you have a certain amount of freedom. And that's something that I appreciate every single day. And so I thank you for allowing me to be in this room with some of the most amazing satirists around the world who work in environments far more hostile than I ever dream of working in. Hussam, who spoke his stories now, and Nkechi, I'm a huge fan of yours. I don't know where you are in the room, but I loved watching the show in Nigeria, and I love the stories that the show has told. And so I appreciate this. I will say this before I go, though. One thing I've learned in this age is comedy relies on a few things. One, it relies on freedom, and it also relies on a common understanding and a common agreement on the truth. That's why people laugh, because it's true. And as that truth gets eroded, we've learned that jokes become less funny because people don't know what the truth is, so they don't know what they're laughing at. And we've learned that. We've learned that irony and satire and sarcasm has slowly had to take a backseat, and we've had to become more explicit. And I don't mean to be alarmist as a person. I don't like it when people say like, "Oh, America's doomed." I don't know if it's doomed or not. What I do know is there are oftentimes signs that the freedoms you take for granted are in fact being eroded. No dictatorship started overnight. In fact, many of them started as a democracy. And I know many Americans pride themselves oftentimes saying that, well, not here in America. Well, it's not anywhere until it happens. And I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying you have to be vigilant in making sure it doesn't happen. You know, I remember Barack Obama said before he left, he said to the people, he said, everybody, democracy is something we got to make sure we don't take for granted. You know, and a lot of people didn't listen. They were like, don't worry, Barry, we got you. We went black, we ain't never going back. But we've learned that you can go back. And so I appreciate this. I appreciate the platform. I appreciate living in a beautiful country where I can do what I do. You know, I appreciate Jon Stewart, who started a legacy that has spread all over the world and inspired people to do this in multiple different ways. And I will say to everyone, let us continue. Let us continue to fight for freedoms around the world. Let us continue to uplift those who do not have voices. Let us fight to be progressive. Let us move marginalized voices forward using comedy, using any freedom of speech that we are allowed. But don't ever forget that same democracy that got us freedom is the same democracy that can get you a Donald Trump. So, good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me.